As Christians, other than praying, what are the steps and ways in which we can help end racism?
I think praying is really important to begin with, because prayer is very powerful and transformative in itself. But clearly we need to do more than prayer, but I suppose true prayer leads into action. So pray first, so Christians can highlight the injustice, and they can draw attention to the evil of racism, and they can highlight and work towards and promote the dignity of every human life. Because it's an evil to distinguish between people or discriminate between people on the basis of the colour of their skin. Catholic teaching highlights the dignity of every human person, the sanctity of every human life. So if you take that to its logical conclusion, it's from conception to natural death, and that it includes every human being of every ethnic background, every country, every opinion. So you might disagree with somebody, but you've got to respect their dignity as a human person. And so there are some sort of ways of treating people that are unacceptable, and ultimately it's the Christian value and the Christian command of love. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love others. Love those who are different color, different background, different perspective, which you have to love. That's the command to love, not just those you like and who like you, but people you disagree with. And there's a way of treating people, other people, and there's a way of not doing so. And I'm afraid what has been highlighted in recent days is deplorable, and it is right that the media has drawn attention to it.
Would it be considered wrong by the Christian community for us to protest?
No, protest by Christian communities and by the Catholic Church seem to be a perfectly laudable sort of right to protest evil and wrongdoing. In fact, it's not just a right, it's probably a duty to highlight it. But of course, the Pope has drawn a distinction between peaceful protest and violent protest. And common sense thing here, that violent protest actually defeats the protest. It does more to damage the cause than promote the cause. So I think when people resort to crime and to violence themselves, I'm afraid it often defeats the very cause they're trying to promote. So peaceful protest, drawing attention to the problem, perhaps a duty for Christians to join protests and to promote racial justice, but certainly racial justice in this regard of what we're speaking about.
Any suggestions of how we can encourage others to understand the view that everyone is equal?
Well, I just mentioned what I said earlier on, that idea of the dignity of every human person and the sanctity of every human life is a very good place to start, I think. If you take that, every person you meet, irrespective of their rich, poor, well-connected, not well-connected, whatever ethnic origin, color, background, that everybody has unique, inalienable human rights and human dignity. And so I think that's a very good place to start. For people without faith, I think that's something that appeals to people's better sense, even if they don't have faith, that every human person is a sacred human life and has dignity conferred upon it. So it shouldn't in any way be discriminated against. It's another thing Christians can do, actually. They can examine their own conscience and their own life to say, well, is there any form of discrimination in my life? To look deeply into one's heart. Because sometimes you find yourself in a situation to find out what's truly within you. You could say, well, I'm not possibly racist. There's not a racist bone in my body. But it takes testing that and being with people and examining one's own conscience. Do you discriminate against people unconsciously?
Unfortunately, many Christian individuals stay numb during these types of situations and maybe think it's better not to get involved. What is your opinion on this perception?
I suppose many Christians, many people generally possibly take that view on many things. Just I'll keep my head down and it'll blow over or whatever else. If we cast our minds back to the last century, in the 1930s, and the rising tide of nationalism in Germany, like Edmund Burke saying, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And that's a serious matter. So if people hadn't stood up in the 1930s and had that awful war, but if that war had never happened, what would the consequence have been? So it does take people to stand up for what is right, for what is true. Again, the evils that were happening at the time needed to be highlighted, and this is true in every age. The temptation might be to keep one's head down and pretend one didn't see. I think the gospel and the Christian message does invite us to go a bit further, to be a bit more courageous than that, to highlight injustice and to fight injustice peacefully and non-violently, because that's the way of Jesus. because I think the violent thing, it becomes very dangerous then, because you're treading a very thin line where the oppressed can easily become the oppressor. So Christians should be prepared to stand up and be counted, and to be brave, and to confront evil wherever they find it.